Vulnerability is, it's like they would fall into a pool and they would drown.
Create real change means they have to face the very things that they think is going to annihilate them.
You're the center of someone's world and getting the flood of those wonderful chemicals, and it can be very intoxicating.
What happens to our attachment style when we've survived a narcissistically abusive relationship? Jessica Baum, author of the book Safe and therapist, joins me to address this question. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jessica Baum. I just got a copy of your book. I know it's coming out in October, about the time this podcast is going to be released. It's called Safe, and how super exciting. So tell me a little bit about who you are and why you decided to write Safe.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed therapist in Florida, and I have one very successful book out called Anxiously Attached. And I study attachment styles. And since that book has kind of left the world in 2022, is out there in the world doing well, I got a lot of questions around how to heal attachment styles, understanding the narcissistic wound. I dive deeper into studying interpersonal neurobiology. I left a relationship, and I really wanted everyone to know like what was really needed to form safe relationships, to build more inner security, what to look for in relationships. And we just thrive in safe, fulfilling relationships. And so I unpacked the neuroscience behind that and really help the listener or the readers understand how to heal attachment wounds that might attract them to, like your audience, and a more narcissistic partner. When we start to heal these wounds on a deeper level, we tend to pick people not from our wounds, but more from a healed place.
Yeah, that's very hard, isn't it? Because in the beginning, the love bombing is so powerful. It's highly attractive, and it really speaks to a lot of human cravings for the need for connection. And there's a lot of attack that victims come under for that. So help us, because you start out the book talking about the need for attachment and why it's so powerful, the human connection. So let's lead there. Like why even in adulthood should we care about why we attach to who we attach?
Yeah, I mean, so, connection I talk about in the book several times is a biological imperative. So when we're in womb and we come out of womb, we need connection like we need food and shelter. Like we cannot survive without connection. As human beings, we are very vulnerable to the connections that we form in early, throughout our whole lives. And so we develop adaptive ways to stay in connection. And that's essentially how we get our attachment styles. But that connection is so important, and I could go into each style. We could talk about why, we might be drawn to more narcissistic personalities based on this early developmental need for connection, because there's a very strong correlation.
Yeah, why don't you do that? Because I know people, because we hear so often in the survivor circles, we pick better.
Yeah. And I think that until you heal, your wounded parts are looking to resolve themselves. And so I talk about in Safe a lot that we move towards what's familiar. So we're more likely going to pick someone who's familiar to our subconscious or implicit world because of our childhood. And so we unconsciously or consciously, we are gravitated. At one point I say it's not like we have a bad picker. It's like we can magnetize the familiar out of the wound because there's a charge in those relationships. So saying to pick better is that's a tough thing. I think healing your abandonment wounds or the reasons why you're drawn to those people, understanding those on a deeper level will shift who you're attracted to, and you'll pick from a more healed place, less from a wound. But when you're an infant, if your mother is struggling or primary caregivers are struggling in their own world with their own stress levels, with their own detachment, and I go into this in such detail.
I know you do. I really appreciate it too.
Yeah. If you're not getting emotional safety and attunement, and many people don't know that they didn't get it, because until we really receive it, we don't understand what we didn't get. But if you're not getting your needs met on some level, and many parents are just doing the best they can, and it's never about blaming our parents, but if they were checked out in any way and just stressed out or more avoidant or anything, we grow up, and when someone comes along and focuses on us a lot of neurochemicals get released in the brain. And it's the same neurochemicals that would get released from a baby who has a primary caregiver that's like kind of really having their world like around them. So what happens is if we didn't get a lot of that, when we get that from a partner, our brain really lights up. And it's actually like the missing developmental link. So we feel like we're the center of someone's world, right? And like sometimes that comes with falling in love, but particularly in more narcissistic bond, the earlier wound, that has to do with a baby really feeling one unit with a mother, like really merging in that early wounding and feeling like you're the center of someone's world and getting the flood of those wonderful chemicals. And it can be very intoxicating. And it also can represent a lot of what your brain didn't get. So you can be very, and I've been there, very susceptible to those relationships. The problem is later as you individuate and as the relationships unfold, that person isn't focusing on you as much, or you'll take abuse because you were hooked at what you got in the beginning. And what you got, go ahead.
Yeah, and unfortunately, what you got in the beginning was a deception, which you didn't know, because that person actually created a facade in order to attract you. That's what's so damaging about love bombing is you didn't really meet the real person. I mean, the person that I met in my toxic relationship wasn't anything like he actually was. When I met who he was, I wouldn't have chose him. I mean, the things that he presented didn't align at all with what was really true about him. So yeah, that makes it harder because then when you end up, but they create this narrative and making you think that who you met is possible. So you keep trying to fix them so you can get back to the starting point, which is really, really tough. There's a part of me, I listen to this and as somebody who survived one of these very dangerous relationships myself recently, there's a part of me that knows that we're human, that I got to hear years ago, Dr. Jill and David Schnarf, who was huge in the object relations theory realm. And they said, we all have abandonment wounds. There's something about us that at a humanity level desire to connect with another person. But I also know that there's imperfect matches between us and the parents. So it's sort of like, to me, I sort of see this as a dual problem. There's the problem that there are predatory people who are just really good at appealing to us, but we're also wounded too. And that it kind of adds like a double prong problem.
I just thank you for saying that. And, I've been in enough relationships too. And I would have to say that a big piece of healing is recognizing where they fit in our trauma story.
Yeah.
And how that them meeting our unmet needs or the things we didn't get kept us like a fish on a hook. I say that in the book. I literally use the word fish on the hook. Yeah. And a big piece of my healing is never about, and I do dive into narcissism in the book, but in a compassionate way, but it's never about the other person. It's always about what is this person waking up in you? And let's turn this on you, because that's how we heal. We don't heal by diagnosing them and all. And I understand that's part of the healing. Like I get that all is there. Yeah. I just had the client right before you, and she's stepping away from this. And it was all about her abandonment wound and her inability to individuate, she would rather fit into somebody else's world and escape into somebody else's world than to really fully be in hers, because she didn't get those developmental needs met. So that's a big piece of healing is yes, you want to identify it. Yes, it's like your jaw drops when you really start to understand this. And we gravitate towards people for implicit reasons. And I talk about like the undercurrent of why we have charge and allure towards particular people runs so deep.
Yeah. And one of the things, I don't know if you've heard of the term echoism or not. Echoism is probably the true opposite of narcissism. And some of us, not everybody who's been in a narcissistic relationship has this problem. I do have a lot of echoistic tendencies. And for me, my early childhood was the degree that I could submerge myself through the identity of particularly a parent, created greater safety. The degree that I prioritized their needs over my own, then I got my needs met, because then I was a good object for them. And so you're right. When I get into a relationship, especially a romantic one, I see myself sort of submerge again, having a really tough time speaking up and promoting my own needs for fear that I'll get abandoned, for fear that I'm going to lose this individual.
Well, in interpersonal neurobiology, we would call that anxious attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is when a primary caregiver and a baby are in connection and the primary caregiver is inconsistent, sometimes she's there, sometimes she's not. Maybe she's anxious, she's not emotionally present because of her own anxiety. We leave our body, we self-abandon, and we attune to the primary caregiver in order to stay in connection. So later on in life, one of the brilliant adaptive strategies is I'm going to leave my body and I'm going to know what your needs are. I mean, I still have it. I know what my dog needs sometimes before my own needs. So like we leave our body brilliantly and we can attune to the room and we can figure out what somebody else's needs are. And if we can meet their needs, then we can stay in connection. And that is the hallmark of anxious attachment. So echoing, I would say, relates very much to anxiously attached.
It does sound a lot. I always thought I was a little more disorganized just because of, although I'm not a disorganized personality, my personality is very stable, but just the inconsistency was so severe. Show up and then there would be a severe breach. Then they'd show up and then another severe breach, that it created an extreme difficulty for me to trust that somebody's going to consistently show up.
So in my new book, Safe, I talk about attachment as a wheel. And I actually have something freebie for your audience to best understand this. But we can have pockets of everything. So I have had pockets of disorganization. If you put me in the right environment and the person is really abusive or really shut down, my system can hit disorganization. Not everyone has disorganization, but if you have disorganization in your body and in your nervous system, it will show up when the environment kind of can activate it, so to speak. But it doesn't mean that you live every day in disorganization.
Yeah. In fact, I got to be a part of a longitudinal study on attachment theory. I was one of the subjects for 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And every 6 weeks they'd send me a personality inventory. It was the Big Five personality test, and then they asked me critical questions about my what was happening in my life. I was just widowed, so it was a huge transition period for me. And then they would ask me all sorts of attachment questions, and then they would let me see, interestingly enough, because they'd ask me about significant other, like my mother, maybe a friend. So they had several people, they were asking me the same questions. And they put me on a grid so you could see secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. And you could see how I float depending on the period of time, depending on what was happening in my life, depending on what's happening in that relationship. And each relationship was different too. So it wasn't like I had a prevalent style across. It varied upon the healthiness of that relationship. It was fascinating to see that.
And I love that you say that. Like I wrote the book Anxiously Attached, and we know, like you said, echoing, like, you know, if that's a default for you, you're going to gravitate towards that. But in Safe, I talk about the complexities of this. So attachment is a buzzword. It's also like a very proven science. Like it's one of the most research proven science. And I'm so happy that like the population is catching on, but that attachment is a two-way street. So I could be attached to you and it's our embedded patterns doing a dance. I could be attached to person X over here and it's our embedded patterns doing a dance.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of two people's embedded patterns. Like anxiously attached people tend to attract more avoidant people, but that's not always the case. If I feel like I'm a lot more secure these days, but if I can have a friend who's really anxious, who might bring up some avoidant patterns in me, and I can have a partner who's really avoidant who could bring up some anxious parts to me, or be connected to someone who's disorganized, and that could wake up a lot inside of me. So it's so much more layered, and I really, really dive into that because I want the public to understand like the complexity of this. It's not just like name your style and that's it. Like, great, that's the beginning, but really understanding that how layered this is, that's basically the bulk of Safe, so that you walk away with a much deeper understanding of attachment patterns.
Oh, in fact, I love the way you end each chapter with it's not just a cursory exercise. It's a detailed description of an exercise, of really holding space with yourself, and so much emphasis on self-awareness. And I really love the fact that you put so much effort into that. One of the things I know survivors get caught, though, because back to this deceptive relationship, which is really, It's a severe example of objectification, where the person who's in the relationship isn't really seen as a real person. They're treated as an object. But one of the ways in which they're kept hooked, though, is that they're told that if they do better, or if they focus on the relationship, or if the relationship gets fixed, or they fix their partner, the predatory or the abusive person, that things would get better. And I've heard a lot of survivors then say, well, I think that narcissists are really just avoidant people who need to be understood. And if we understood them better, then we could fix them and the relationship could be saved. I would love to know what you think about that, if you've worked with a narcissist, and what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I have, and I also feel like the problem with this is that so narcissistic wound is so early on, and they have so much shame. Shame and disorganization are at the core of narcissism. And so they have to create a world that protects them from their wound. And so they have a lot of, I talk about in this book, this idea of protectors. We all have protectors, and we can all be aware of our protectors, but they have a very strong need for a lot of protectors, because if they were to feel their original shame, they wouldn't be able to tolerate it.
Yeah, let's go back to stop for a second, because I want to finish this thought, but let's define protectors, because when I saw that part, I really identified that you were talking a lot of what Richard Schwartz also talks about in ISF. So, but most of the rest of us may not know what that is. So what's a protector?
Okay. So yeah, if you're listening, a protector is a part of you. It can be a critical voice, but it's a part of you that gets developed to cope with pain. It can be a habit like drinking or overeating or over-exercising. Now, exercising isn't bad, and none of it is bad, but we develop ways to protect ourselves from what's going on inside. I know workaholism, I talk a lot about in the book, was a big protector for me. And it's also like so supported in our culture, right? Like I was like telling everybody, I'm so busy, but I was actually avoiding what was going on in my body because I didn't have safe enough people, and I didn't actually understand fully what I needed to heal. So I had to rely heavily on my protectors, and thank God we have them. But as we start to heal our attachment wounds, they become less dominant, and we don't need them as much. So I think the first step, and I talk about this, is actually embracing them. And some people are like, I don't want to embrace my eating disorder, and I don't want to, but it's like, what are they protecting you from? Once we start to really understand what they're protecting you from, they can kind of step aside, and we can start to be with the original pain and wound, and we can look at them as adaptive and necessary for the time. And I know that's like a weird way to think, but a lot of people who struggle with substance abuse, a lot of people who struggle with overeating, a lot of people who struggle with shopping too much, they're trying to manage something inside, and without the right people and ways to deal with what's going on inside, we very much need our protectors. And narcissists are the same way.
Yeah, in fact, I see protectors as not even broader than that. I see that as any critical part of us that speaks to us. Sort of, I know Freud talks about it as a super ego. It runs ahead and is very critical. But, if you think about it, the world's dangerous and it's already on you. Don't do that, or do more of that, or what's wrong with you? It's trying to get ahead of what it thinks the world's going to do to you.
Yeah, no, so like protectors are needed, but I also think that critical part of you, a lot of my clients will be like, look how successful I am, and look how much I needed this protector. And it's like, yes, there's a positive side to the protector, but also you want to get underneath that protector a little bit. Yeah,
I wasn't saying it was positive. I'm just saying that it's protective. That's why we call it protectors.
But what is it really protecting you from? That takes a lot of awareness. So if society's saying I have to look perfect, and I have to work a lot, and I have to be successful, what is it protecting you from? The part of you that's not perfect, the part of you who maybe has failed, and who didn't show up for those parts? And how do we allow those parts to be part of this? I think IFS, for those who are listening, internal family systems, is very close to what I'm providing in the book. The only difference is IFS talks about these parts. In this book, I talk about meeting these parts with another safe person. So it's about us going together into these parts. That's like the big difference, but very much drawn from IFS.
Yeah. I could feel the similarity between the two, of learning to embrace them and learning to do this. I mean, because really what the whole book is, to me, in a nutshell, is you becoming safe with you. you meeting yourself and bringing people in your world who can be with you in a really powerful way. And yeah, and these protectors are defensive. They're unconscious processes that we've developed to protect ourselves, and we want it to be a conscious process, not an unconscious process.
We want it. Yeah, you're going to build a lot of awareness for this book. But let's say like one of my protectors is being perfect. And I'm like, oh, this week I'm really dealing with something. And I'm like signing up for a lot of workout classes. It's not that protector's. I say, oh my God, you're here with me right now. And I get that you want to do this to feel safer or feel better. What's really going on underneath? And I think once you start to do this work, we welcome them, we see them, but there are different levels of awareness with them and different communication with them. And, IFS and doing this work is never about getting rid of these behaviors or parts. It's when you heal, you need them less, or you see what they've really been serving for you and you evolve out of them. I think
I would say integrate with them is what I would say.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah. So back to the narcissist. Let's go back to, you were saying when I interrupted you, was that their protectors are so, first of all, very early, which means they're extremely unconscious and not very accessible. But you were starting to say other things too about them.
Well, I think that vulnerability is, I think it's hard. Listen, vulnerability was hard for me, but vulnerability is, it's like, they would fall into a pool and they would drown, right? Like, and the reason, and I'm not trying to, like, I built so much empathy for narcissists. Like, the thing about it is to be able to understand it and choose to not engage with it, right? Like, so healing means there are unhealed people. And someone who struggles with narcissistic or borderline tendencies, it's early wounding. What's going on inside of their body is so not safe, so intense that they have to build these walls of protection up, right? And so I have a lot of compassion for it. And I understand if you're listening, maybe that's not the case because you've been abused by one. But I think when you step away, we see how dysregulated they are, how wounded they are, how much they are in survival mode, and we choose to not engage.
I almost see it like it's like the finger trap, the more you pull on it, trying to get out, the more it binds you. That to me, what happens with them is to see themselves for self-awareness, for which to create real change, means they have to face the very things that they think is going to annihilate them. And they're not going to do that.
And I talk about avoidant attachment. Annihilation is at the core of avoidant attachment. And
well, interesting. A lot of narcissists are, I think there's been some studies showing that a lot of them are avoidant. Not all of them, but a lot of them are pretty avoidant personality type or attachment types.
Yeah, and I think the annihilation is just the horrible feeling. You're going to fall into a pit of nothingness, and we can have pockets of that, but that's how threatening it is. So to answer your original question, can they heal? With a lot of work and years of work and putting down their protectors and a strong desire within themselves to make that change. But every single one of their protectors protects them from the original wound. So it's really like a double-edged sword. And I have to say, like, I had so many protectors unconsciously. Like, this is varying degrees. Everything's on a spectrum. So, when you really start to understand this stuff, start to understand that, in some situations, it's a lost cause. And sometimes letting go with love is a better option than someone who has all these protectors and aren't really willing to, if they're not willing to really do the work, you're really gonna, you're gonna exhaust yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's exhausting.
Exactly.
You're gonna have a lot of circle talks.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it is, and it is very exhausting. I felt drained. I mean, between being just terrified in that relationship, I was also just absolutely drained trying to save this relationship, save this person. Yeah. So the other part of the book the back part is where you really dive into the healing. And what I thought was interesting is you took the angle of healing with somebody, really looking very seriously at your world and finding, and analyzing those relationships. That's tough. When we get out of these relationships, we often discover that we've surrounded ourselves with the unhealthy people. So it can get really tricky. So say more about how that happens. How do you find safe people?
First of all, I appreciate so much that you've read so much of the book. That means so much to me. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh,
I study, for you guys listening, interpersonal neurobiology. So I study so much about how we develop, but I also really study the science of healing. And anyone who's really studying this stuff understand what was once wounded in relationship can only be healed in relationship.
And that's something I want to stop you there, that really, because so many of us are told you cannot get into another relationship until you heal. And I agree with you, Jessica. There's no healing unless, first of all, try not to be in a relationship. You're in a relationship all the time with somebody or something.
Right.
But, yeah. So the idea of it is an impossibility. But the wounding happened in the relationship. The healing's got to happen in the relationship.
Well, so yeah, I mean, and those of you who have gotten into another relationship, there's no judgment, right? Like maybe you can't. You don't have the right support. But what I mean is that relationship, and for myself included, I was in a relationship where we did a lot of therapy together, but he wasn't willing to go deeper into the healing. So I had to heal in a therapeutic relationship, right? I believe romantic relationships can be healing. I'm a couples counselor. And if your partner is not willing to do the healing, you need to do that healing work with another human. Now, there becomes a certain point where you really do a lot, and I have a lot of somatic work, but the earlier the attachment wound, the more adult anchoring you need. So the science shows that when the wounds surface, so if you and I were in therapy together and I had a neuroception of safety, which is something I dive deep into the book, and eventually your nervous system started to trust mine, the work would show up. And the earlier the wound, and again, the book very much talks about going into the body because that's where it all lives and we need to be doing that kind of work. The earlier the wound, the more the adult anchoring we need to move it out of the body into the right hemisphere and integrate it into the left.
So say what does that mean? Because that was a lot of lovely sounding things, but very complex.
So our attachment wounds, which are things that repeatedly happen to us that we don't get to process, get stored in the body. Think like the body keeps the score. When we are in healthy relationships, especially therapeutic, but I talk about anchors and how to build these relationships without necessarily going to a therapist. But when we are in supportive relationships that hold what I call a neuroception of safety, the wounds that are in our body can start to become more available for healing. And so neural nets open in an environment of safety, and things that lived in our body, we can start to tune into them. We develop something called neuroception. And between you and I, we can start to be with these younger parts. But it's my nervous system holding your nervous system that creates co-regulation for a combined nervous system that helps move and first be with. First, we have to be with, and we build a tolerance, a window of tolerance together. We hold, and eventually those things that were stored in our body move through our body, and through they happen through the right channels that go up to the right hemisphere, and then we start to integrate them, which then shifts them to the left. And it's not that healing never happens. It's not that things don't, but we are building space within because we're finally getting the person that can help hold what we've been storing inside. Does that make sense? I know it's like really complicated, but
yeah, and you give a practical exercise. So for those that would like to know how do you do that, I love the fact that you actually share how to do that. But it reminded me when I saw that exercise, it reminded me of, are you familiar with David Schnarf's work, The Passionate Marriage? He talks about it in the beginning. It's really actually a book about how to have great sex. But he says you can't really have great sex if you can't be safe. So he then talks about it in terms of, he calls it differentiation. You need to be fully yourself in order for you to meet another self. And he has what he calls the 10-minute hug. And then he describes, so this awareness exercise in this hug, like, are you carrying their weight? Are they standing on their own 2 feet? Are you on your own 2 feet? Or are you leaning into them? What does it feel like to be in this hug past that point where suddenly you're now feeling edgy and you want to break it? What does it feel like to move through that to where you finally relax into the hug? It's a very powerful exercise when you do that with somebody. Yeah, it first of all, it really takes us outside of our comfort zone in a massive way. And I think, don't you think that's a little bit of what you're talking about here in the sense of connection?
Yeah, I think you can have really good sex if you haven't individuated. I think people who attach to narcissistic wounds, they can have fused sex, and the person who's more narcissistic can figure you out. Like,
Mm.
but I think you can have, but I don't think it's intimate sex. I think true intimacy comes more from an individuated person.
Yeah, that's what he says too.
Yeah,
He said the way to have mind-blowing eye socket. He has a phrase that he uses in the book, but what he's talking about is being known, seeing into and experiencing another person, which, yeah, narcissists aren't known. They don't want to be known, so that doesn't happen. It may be really good performative sex, but doesn't make it intimate.
right, right. And deep intimacy, I believe, and for those who are listening, like, my deep intimacy has come from my friendships that are willing to just sit with me, have deeper conversations, allow me to be who I am. I think I love my parents so much, and I talk about this, but they weren't good at holding my emotional experience. And so I had clients that I can't tell you how many clients are in the same bracket as me. It's like our parents grew up in the world of workaholism and avoidance. And they didn't know how to hold emotional space for us. And so when we get older and we find people who can, first it's scary, first it's vulnerable, but then you change your level of intimacy. Like, into me I see, into you I see. I allow you to be right where you are. You don't have to be happy for me. You can be sad today. You can be where you're at. I'm never going to try to change you. I'm just going to be here for you. So many people, and I call them anchors in the book, don't have people like that, and I really talk about how to find those people, because that's where we start to have more fulfilling, more intimate bonds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is really rich. I can tell you and I could talk a very long time about this and go into many different angles. So let's jump over to the podcast extra and talk specifically some steps about how to heal if you recognize you've come out of a relationship and maybe your attachment style has become worse. Maybe you've taken a step back, how you can maybe take some step forward. But how can people learn more about you, Jessica, as well as find the book safe?
Yeah, I think too, like, people who come out of early wounding, narcissistic, we'll call it narcissistic, I think the recovery time is 10 times harder and 10 times longer. I don't think it's normal, I don't like to use the word normal. I was telling this to a client, like, it's a harder recovery. You have to redefine. You're like, the rug's been pulled out from underneath you.
Oh, it has.
Yeah.
As I said, we now know there's self-perceptual distortions, that the sense of self has been, another psychologist said, shattered. Your sense of self has been shattered. You have to pretty much redefine yourself.
Yeah. And I talk about leaving a relationship in this book, but like, some of my clients who've walked through that, if you're doing the healing work, that is the relationship that woke you up. Right. And so much healing can come from that. So I forgot what was the question.
Well, how to find you and more about the book safe. How to find the book.
Oh yeah. So I'm on Instagram, Jessica Baum LMHC. I have a group practice called the Conscious Relationship Group. I also have a private practice in Palm Beach called the Relationship Institute of Palm Beach. And for your listeners, we are providing a special, like, downloadable kind of brochure or information around Beyond the Labels. So it will go through all the attachment labels, the wheel of attachment that's inside the book. So if you pre-order the book, you get all of this, and a conversation with my mentor who studies interpersonal neurobiology. And we talk deeply about what it feels to have earned security. So for the people who, I know the link has been sent to you, and for the people who buy it, I want them to have something immediately. The attachment form, they get a video of me, and then the book will come. And so it will just give them a little bit of, like, a little bit of information before they get the book in their hands. I want them to get something right away. So yes, please click that link. The book is amazing, and the book can be found anywhere. I mean, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, like, many places in the world, but I'm assuming your demographic is more in the US, but
it is.
Any high realtor. It's safe, an attachment informed guide to building more secure relationships. And again, use the link because you'll get the free stuff with the link.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for being a guest. This was a very fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for reading it. I appreciate the conversation so much. And yeah, I'm just grateful. Oh, thank you, Jessica. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? You can find me at Kerry McAvoy, PhD. Or you can learn more about me and my resources, such as the Toxic Free Relationship Club, at kerrymcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.